Hello everyone and welcome to the 29th episode of the IWFM webinar series, Navigating Turbulent Times. Can't believe we're already on episode 29, but this is sure to be a good one like the previous 28, I'm sure. As you can see on your screens there, today's webinar is about bridging FM's digital divide, the power of digital partnerships in partnership with Microsoft. And yes, that is our title of our brand new guidance that's going to be launched this week. Just to make people aware, I'm Peter Brogan, Head of Research and Insight, who's going to be your host today, and I'm sure many of you have seen me on previous episodes of our Navigating Turbulent Times webinar series. Just to remind listeners, viewers, we are recording this live, so if you can't make today's episode or colleagues, it can be cascaded out afterwards. But you can see on your screens there the great stellar panel we have lined up today, and yes, the three gentlemen on the screens there are actually the authors of the guide that I was referring to. So we've got Ian Ellison, Workplace Change Agent, Free Edges, James Pinder, Workplace Change Agent, Free Edges, and David Williams, actually from Microsoft, Smart Places and Real Estate Industry Lead. So what I tend to do here is, rather than read off a massive bio, I've said on many episodes that takes up 20 minutes of the webinar, we only got an hour today, I asked the panelists just to do a bit of introductions from themselves to let you know, listeners, viewers, who they are, and without a spoiler alert, a little bit about what they will be discussing today. So as I will go across, as you see on your screens there. So Ian, good morning, sir, or good afternoon, I should say.
Hey there, Peter. So hello, folks. So my name's Ian Ellison. I am, I guess, a self-confessed workplace nerd, essentially. I have 20 years in facilities management and workplace. I've run operational buildings and estates. I've taught workplace and facilities management at university. I've researched, I've written about workplace, and now I'm one half of a workplace change organisation called Three Edges with James. So today, as part of the authors of this report, it's kind of my job to set the scene first and talk about why we've ended up where we've ended up with this particular document, which we hope is going to really help you in the industry and the profession, and kind of play a role in bringing it to life for you.
Thank you, Ian, and a nice segue into your co-funding agent partner there, James. So good afternoon, James.
Thanks, Peter. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, my name's James Pinder. I'm co-founder of Three Edges along with Ian Ellison. My background was originally in the property industry, and I trained as a building surveyor, and then I had a spell in academia after studying for a PhD, and that's where I became interested in FM and workplace. And then I've spent the last 15 years doing a mixture of applied research and workplace consultancy, most recently with Three Edges, which we founded 3 or 4 years ago. And in this webinar, I'll sort of talk to you about the middle section of the report that's going to be launched today, and that's around digital literacy. So it's kind of, I'll talk you through that in a little bit more detail, and hopefully that'll pique your interest and you'll download the report afterwards.
Hi everyone, my name's David Williams. I work for Microsoft. I live in the UK, but I actually report to our corporate headquarters in Redmond, where I am part of a team that's responsible for the smart places and real estate industry. My relationship and how I got involved with my relationship with the IWFM, and also how I got into writing this report, was all to do with really meeting each other at events and realizing that maybe there needed to be a better partnership between the FM industry as a whole and the digital technology industry. Obviously, Microsoft being one of the leading companies in the world at digital technology, I just thought it was a great opportunity to have that conversation. So what I've kind of liked to think that I've brought to the report is really around, how I see digital technology can practically be used. Yes, we've all seen, the dream of the three-dimensional building that you can spin around, where everybody is, where all the faults are. That's possible. However, being realistic, you've got to start somewhere else. And so by working with Ian and James and Peter, they've really educated me around the challenges and challenged me to come up with some more practical solutions about how we can use digital technology, how the FM industry can partner with digital technology companies and actually together solve some of the challenges for the industry and the individuals.
Fantastic. Thanks, David. Okay, so folks, the story with this kind of actually starts back in 2017. So James and I were doing some research to actually inform the IWFM board at the time and get them exploring the future direction of IWFM and its interrelationship with the industry. And we were exploring the role of workplace, its relationship to facilities management, and what the key things were that FM needed to be thinking about to be successful for the future. That led to a really rich data set, which was actually really quite insightful around technology and facilities management. And we got into this conversation about, this might be really good information for the board, but you know what? There's brilliant research potential here. We need to take the information more broadly out to the industry to show them. So we ended up actually writing 3 different insight reports, one about workplace, one about technology, and one about culture. I'm going to now show you some of the highlights from that first report, which was published in 2018. It's still available on the IWFM Insight page, and you can still get hold of it and have a look. So, essentially, we kind of took stock of the market, and we asked people about facilities management and how they were feeling about the industry. And, we've got some really interesting statistics, which was, we're optimistic about the future of facilities management as a whole. Broadly speaking, we don't feel that facilities management is under threat, but FM needs to be more customer focused, FM needs to be better educated, and FM needs to have more strategic value to organizations. So it's really interesting because there's kind of a bit of a paradox in that. We don't feel threatened, but we're not good enough. And that was the starting point to then start thinking about our relationship as facilities management to some of the technology we use. And so the first thing we did was you sort of stepped back and we thought, what are all the digital technologies that we should be aware of already? Things like building management systems, things like, CAFM systems, things like BIM, and then stretching into the more sort of emergent stuff like Internet of Things. So what stuff should we be available? What technology should we be aware of already, and what stuff do we need to be aware of? And when we talk about stuff we need to be aware of, we kind of said, well, if you think about it, there's kind of 3 areas. There's automation, there's analytics, and there's artificial intelligence. And you can use those as almost family groups beyond the gateway technologies that we should already know about that we need to be able to deal with. And so we constructed a new survey, which we administered through LinkedIn, where we said, of all of these different technologies, and we sort of listed them one at a time, building management systems, CAFM systems, BIM, all the way down to chatbots and, additive manufacturing, that kind of thing, 3D modeling, 3D printing. How much do you know about them? And it was really, really telling that even the stuff that we should know about, the industry or the people responding to the survey were actually saying, we don't know very much. In all honesty, we don't know very much. And then the next question was, of all of these same technologies, what role do you think they're going to have to play in the industry moving forwards? And there was a jump. There was an acknowledgement that probably all technology is going to creep and be more important in the future. But there was also this, almost failure to recognize the significance of just how important some of these technologies could be. So in some respects, it's actually quite a damning message for us. It's quite a damning message because it kind of says, we don't know a great deal now, even the stuff that we ought to be experts in. Generally speaking, we're not really experts, lots of us. And in terms of what's coming in future, we don't know a great deal about that either. Now, that creates quite a risk for an industry, which led us to a little survey which we did then, and we're going to do with you now. Okay. So this kind of research I was telling you about, where we ended up was essentially from the data that we'd gathered from people, as well as getting them to talk about the different technologies and how much we knew about them, we used the more qualitative data, people talking about, you know, what they saw as the future for home. We were able to sort of create 4 different scenarios, and these 4 different scenarios are shown here. And I've just pulled this image from the report if you want to sort of look at this more deeply. But first scenario is, you know, FM's going to be broadly the same as it is now, but with more technology. And we kind of called that a digital upgrade, if you like, which is good news, which is why I've given it a green light. Second scenario is FM's going to be less relevant due to technology. It's going to become de-skilled and it's going to become marginalized. So we call that a digital downgrade. It's not down and out, but it's certainly downgraded. So that's an amber light, okay? Third scenario, FM as we know it, it won't exist. It's going to be disrupted by new technologies, which means it's being displaced. So that's a red light for the industry. That's a red light for the profession. That isn't a future where we can feel strong or positive, okay? And then the fourth scenario, FM is going to be more about data science and analytics. It's going to involve fewer people. It's going to change shape. It's going to digitally reinvent. And so that's a positive future, but it's a different future. It's certainly very different to the first scenario. So we gave that another green light. Now we ran this poll and we asked people to predict or to, you know, vote for the future that they saw as most likely for the profession, for the facilities management industry. So if we can get the tech gremlins working, fingers crossed, what we're going to do is we want to redo that poll with you now. So on the next slide, we're going to launch this poll and you're going to see abridged versions of those 4 choices. We want you to vote for the choice just like we did back in the research in 2018. So you should have an option now to click to cast your votes. So Annie or Michelle, do you want to tell me? Okay, so this is where we're at, folks. So they're in the same order as what I just talked through. The first one's a digital upgrade. The second one is a digital downgrade. The third one is a digital displacement. And the fourth one is a digital reinvention. So just cast your votes and press submit. And let's see where you got to. Okay, for FM is going to be the same as now, but with more technology, 57%. FM is going to be less relevant, so the downgrade 1%, the displacement 3%, and about reinvention 38%. So overwhelming scoring for the 2 positive futures of facilities management, which are, by the way, incredibly different in terms of what they mean for the industry. One means very much the same as now, with upskilling. 2 means complete reinvention. So they're not related. They're quite radical differences. Okay, so that's quite interesting because you've done exactly the same as we've got exactly the same results there as what we saw when we did this back in 2018. So if we could go on to the next slide, please. So that's exactly how it scored with you, is exactly how it scored this time around. What's really interesting is that is a classic scenario for disruption. And this is what we argued in the report in 2018. So if you think everything is all right, bearing in mind you've admitted through other research data that we don't have the skills for the future, we don't know enough yet, it's really interesting that we're so positive. And that actually raised some concerns for us, which is why we're back with a second report. So if we just move on, please, Peter, I'll just whip through these last couple of slides. You know, it isn't as easy as flicking a switch and changing our path, our trajectory of facilities management. There are plenty of opportunities that can come from technology, but there are also huge challenges within the industry, which we elaborate on within the report, the original report in 2018. So this is just kind of a summary slide. If you want to know more about this and dig into these, then please go there. But if we could just move on, Peter, in the interest of time, you know, it's a really tough message. It's that digital transformation, and we show this elsewhere in the report, is very much the reality. It's where the world is headed. It's where the profession and the industry is headed. And FM isn't very digitally literate. And, you know, despite this, we actually perceive that we'll be okay. We said it in 2018, and you know, if you folks are a kind of representative sample of the industry on the webinar today, you said the same today. And maybe this is firing you up for some good Q&A and some good debate at the end of this. But you know, this is a concern, and FM really needs to do something about this. And back in 2018, it was to be continued, and that's where we are now. So I think, Peter, it's over to you.
Indeed, Ian, and I'm back after a power cut, which is very frustrating, and apologies once again. So it's hopefully where I left you, you got the introductions from David and the panel, and Ian's kind of gone through the 2018 findings, which was really the foundations of building on, okay, as an institute, what do we do next in terms of providing guidance research around the subject matter when we talk about technology. So in terms of what you see there is actually the report that hopefully you did hear from me earlier on before I did get cut off around bridging facilities management digital divide, the guidance that will be released this week that will be available to members and non-members. And what we're trying to cover in that, in some ways we've oversimplified it, but if we had to put it into 4 areas, is what does it actually mean to be digitally literate, and the benefits of improving that literacy to the actual FM profession. That's what the guide's actually trying to tackle and wrestle with. What would the profession actually look like if this transformation happened? So what is that, I guess, that change or that paradigm shift we're looking for, particularly around the profession when it comes to its understanding and usage of tech, how you harness the digital technologies through partnership approaches, and obviously that's been highlighted within the guide, and you will hopefully get some persona on the webinar today of some interaction on the case studies that we've actually put in the report, just to give you some flavour of what some real life examples there in terms of the actual different partnership approaches when it comes to harnessing digital technologies. And also probably the point 4 is actually the awareness level, being aware of emerging digital technologies. Technology, as we've all experienced from a personal or work perspective, has radically changed in the last 10-15 years, and it's almost trying to keep on top of that, as well as the big issues now, particularly around digital ethics and data security. That's something that's always been one of the big skeptical views around usage of tech, and it's something that the guide touches upon, and future guidance for the Institute will certainly be tackling areas around that. And essentially, with the art of the possible, actually highlighting to our readers, our audience, around what actually is possible with tech, and obviously with the power of digital partnerships. So as I say, the guide will be available on our Insight Hub, which I'll talk about later, where you'll find this guide, and it will be launched this week. But that's just to give you a bit of a flavour today around what the guide's actually going to produce in terms of output for you, and obviously something we've done in partnership with Microsoft, and we've been very pleased with the outcome and the output that we've produced. So if I move on, as I'm back into slides, James, I think this is your section, certainly around one aspect of the report or the guidance tackled, and is a wider issue that as an institute we're tackling through future programs around technologies, digital literacy and skills. So James, over to you.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, digital literacy is something that Ian's already touched upon in the intro, and that Peter's just mentioned, and it's something we focus on in the report in a bit more detail, and we I guess we look more broadly outside of FM. We look at digital literacy from a national point of view, and why governments have taken an interest in that, because global competitiveness, and also this sort of notion of digital literacy and skills as what's been termed the new basics. So those really important educational foundation stones that allow people to thrive in life and in their careers and in their jobs. And digital literacy has also been sort of something that's been on the radar of professional bodies and particular professions. And one of the examples we talk about in the report is the nursing and midwifery profession in the UK, and how they sort of focused on this topic, and the importance of improving the digital literacy of their profession. And one of the key points to make here is it's not about in the case of nurses, all nurses becoming technologists. In the same way, it's not about all FMs becoming technologists, but it's about raising that overall level of awareness and understanding of what technologies can do and how they can be used. And there's a couple of quotes there that I've included on this slide, which I think sort of distills down the essence of what we're talking about when we're talking about digital literacy. So one is that sort of digital capabilities that enable confident use of technology and new technologies, and then those skills and attitudes that allow people to get the most of those technologies. And ultimately, it's about improving outcomes. So in nursing, you may have health outcomes. In FM, you've got other outcomes, but it's ultimately how can you use technology in service of those outcomes. So, collectively as a profession, as an FM and workplace profession, how can the profession become more aware about what technologies are out there, what technologies are on the horizon, and what can they do for us as professionals, and what can they do for our clients and customers. And ultimately, it's about being able to have more informed conversations with people who are experts in these technologies, but don't necessarily know about FM and workplace and the work that you do. Okay, Peter, if you could move over, please. Thank you. And then the other thing we talk about off the back of that is this notion of exploring the art of the possible. And I guess that links back to that final point on the last slide, which is about being able to have those more informed conversations. But to be able to do that, you need to do some other things. Part of it is challenging assumptions about how we currently do things. And in the report, we use an example of just some questions that you can ask yourself that sort of can help you challenge those assumptions. So, is there a better way for us to do this particular activity? Does the thing we're doing or the thing we've always done, does it actually add value, or could there be another way of doing that? So we sort of include some of those in the report that you could maybe ask yourself and use within your work or within your team. And then the other thing we talk about in the report is this, the importance of understanding user or customer needs and seeing things from their perspective, and that can often be difficult because we do tend to see things from our own mountaintops, and we often see ourselves as the experts and the ones that can see the problems, but putting ourselves in other people's shoes can also be a way of exploring the art of the possible and maybe understanding problems in a different way. And what we do in the report is we introduce 3 tools that I guess technologists and designers tend to use for understanding problems and seeing things from other people's perspectives. So one of those is personas, so fictional characters that embody the needs of a particular group, the needs or challenges of a particular group of people. The other is journey mapping, which actually as FMs and workplace professionals is probably something you're familiar with. So visually mapping a person's experiences through a journey or a situation, and spotting those moments of truth or those pain points. And then the third tool that we introduce is this idea of jobs to be done. So identifying and articulating what a person wants to accomplish in a particular situation, so that you can understand, how you might be able to enable them to do that. So yeah, we introduce these tools, and then we kind of use those in these fictional case studies that Peter talked about. So we introduce 3 personas. We introduce Charlie, who's a senior in-house FM in an NHS trust. We introduced Jules, who works for an FM service provider in a managerial role for a prestigious client, and then Jo, who's the founder of a small FM maintenance company, and she's essentially wanting to transform her business and use technology to do that. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Ian and David, and they're going to focus on one of these personas, one of these fictional case studies. They're going to look at Jules' situation and explore that in more detail.
Thanks, James. So as James said, the use of personas and journey mapping is a tool I use actually every day to explain the art of the possible when I talk about digital technology. And when I started working with IWFM and with James and Ian, my part of the team was really to understand better the challenges that FMs face, and then to think about which emerging technologies are most likely to affect the profession, and actually how. To kind of talk about those opportunities and the challenges that technology present for the FM profession, and actually then to think through in really practical ways how, as a technologist in a digital technology company, I would actually approach these challenges myself. And the discussions about how well placed FM is and the profession is to cope with those changes, it is very revealing, but I have to say, reflects exactly my own experience of working in the real estate industry, where FM is clearly an important part of the overall picture. What's interesting to think about how the profession might think differently is, I think it's really important that any industry, when challenged maybe by change, feels that they own what's happening going forward, and it's not being done to them. And to me, in my professional life, the way in which I've done that is by building relationships, breaking out of that vendor, you're buying something from me, but actually bringing the expertise of that industry or that customer or that partner, in your case FM, and then bring our expertise around digital technologies and actually bring in ideas, not just from the FM industry, but actually exemplars from other industries that maybe because of your job and because of where you're focused, you don't always see. As James said, we created these personas to kind of bring them to life. And I was challenged to actually then understand the challenges and come up with, how I would realistically advise the individual in that role. So Ian, for the purposes of today, is going to be talking about the role that Jules has.
Yeah, so sorry, David. I thought that was my cue a little bit too soon there. Yeah, so it's worth saying that of these three, before we get stuck into the Jules example, it's worth kind of saying that we tried to create three different personas situations, which kind of they're like wrappers for broader FM issues. So you might feel a real resonance with some of the things we're going to talk about, and that's entirely deliberate, because we know we've sort of lived and felt and breathed the industry, and we know these are the sorts of things which are literally going on day in, day out in different organizations. So yes, we're going to be talking about Jules for the purpose of this webinar, but when you look at the report and when you explore Charlie and Joe and Jules, you really should feel a resonance with things, and it should talk to you about, as James said, the art of the possible. So if we go on to the next slide, please, and I'll just start to introduce Jules, so to try and bring this to life. So as James said, she's a key account manager at a TFM service provider, total facilities management service provider. She works on the client side, heading up an outsourced team at the headquarters of a multinational finance company in a prestigious office in central London. So that's the kind of FM we're talking about here, the kind of the shiny end, the high quality end, the expensive end, for the organizations lucky enough to be able to sort of be in that space. Jules is responsible for employee experience, front of house, reception, concierge, catering, cleaning, maintenance, and security services.
And so that's a heck of a broad portfolio, and I take my hat off to anyone that's responsible for all of that. But can we just drill into some of these challenges a little bit and kind of try and understand, what Jules sees on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, absolutely, David. So despite being there front of house and despite having that broad remit, the really interesting thing is, as a service provider, actually, Jules doesn't feel particularly close to the client, despite speaking to loads of them on a day-to-day basis. So as a consequence, she's always on the back foot. She's always reacting to issues. She feels information poor. She doesn't ever feel like she's got a big picture of what's actually going on with the client business so that she can plan ahead. So she has to sort of put the effort in, day out, work long hours to keep on top of what's going on.
So when you talk about that reactiveness, is that really a very common experience? And how does that kind of impact her kind of relationship within her own team? Because obviously she's got the client, but she's also responsible to her own company as well.
Yeah, I think it would be remiss of me to say that this is a generic thing for all service provision, but in that relationship between a client and a service provider, it isn't often or always equitable. And yeah, she is always pretty much in reactive mode. The impact on her is that she's wasting time and energy chasing things up. She's frustrated because she can see where improvements could be made. But what's really interesting is because they're not part of her service provider's remit, it's almost like her input isn't welcome because it's not
Right.
part of what she should be doing. So, she can see examples like they could be using their workspace
Right.
way better than they are, but that's not her suite of things she should be responsible for.
So she's clearly an experienced person, experienced FM, otherwise she wouldn't be in this kind of role. But I'm kind of getting this message that she kind of feels undervalued, really. She feels like she should be able to contribute more to both her client satisfaction, but actually also the company for whom she works, their success.
Yeah, and let's not lose sight of the fact that she's got to perform. She's kind of got two bosses, hasn't she? She's got the client, but directly she's also under pressure from her own management to literally drive up business to improve status with the client. But then you get into this kind of catch-22 of, well, I can see ways we could do it, but we're going to have to invest. Well, we're not going to invest if the client's not prepared to invest. It's that classic kind of backwards and forwards. If the relationship isn't seen as mutually valuable, so they either can't provide funding because they simply don't have it, or they don't know how to support Jules on site. So something's missing there as well.
Yeah, I suppose that's why we've kind of called it this cannot initiate change. That real challenge of how do you actually try and initiate change? And I guess that's where I kind of come in, really, to try and help that conversation.
And on a day-to-day basis, just for example, day-to-day sort of service complaints, they happen on a day-to-day basis, and they get brought up at monthly monitoring meetings. But it's kind of like, oh well, we don't have all of the information, we don't have all of the details to be able to come up with actionable solutions. No. We can't spot trends. We don't know. It's a bit anecdotal. It's a bit word of mouth. It's a bit kind of unprofessional, despite the gloss of the service.
And that's a great example of kind of the fact that she feels information poor around something that, complaints must be such a pain, because actually in the big scheme of things, they're actually not the really big things you're doing, but no. They're the things you get scored against and the things that everyone whinges about.
And that's
it seems to me, sorry, go on.
So I was just saying, and that's the irony of the whole thing, because whether your client, whether your service provider, we know as FMs, we want to do a great job, right? That's what we get out of bed for in the morning. So we know, Jules knows stuff that can help the client be better, that can help her service provider management essentially improve services for other customers, and she can do a better job, but she just needs the help in being able to get there. And that's kind of where all of this stems from. It's like a lack of basic information, a lack of evidence. So this is where I get to call on you on behalf of Jules, David. Like, how can you help her from a tech partner perspective? What would we do?
Yeah, and I think that is, and to be honest, this is a very common situation that we find ourselves in as a company that works with experts in their field. And looking at this, it's clear that Jules wants to raise herself and her company's standing with the client. She wants to get beyond that kind of vendor status that I see all the while in real estate, actually, not just in FM, but in developers and in construction industry as well. There doesn't seem to be this kind of relationship that we have in the digital technology industry, where partnership is everything. I mean, one of the things that sometimes surprises people is if you think about Microsoft, 95% of Microsoft revenue is through partner. 95%. It's only 5% direct sales.
Yeah, that's astonishing. That's astonishing.
And partnering is kind of just in our lifeblood. So the opportunity here was, what I saw straight away was really around that partnering, and how actually straightforward and easy it is to build those relationships, because the vast majority of companies in digital technology, it is in their DNA.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so do you want to sort of start building how this might look for Jules then? Do you want to start taking us through kind of maybe the thought process or some of the key things that we need to focus on?
Yeah, so one of the biggest challenges in industries where cost seems to be the focus is we've lost sight of the value. And actually, the further you get up the client's organization, normally the more they understand the value of things and not just the cost. So we're very used in digital technology to explaining things in value, because digital technology in of itself is, you can't see it. How do I kind of articulate to you the value of something that you can't actually really see, except by example, and then by talking about the value of it as opposed to how much it costs. And that is very much the way we do business.
Okay, so that, just to sort of spot that then, that classic challenge that FM has, it can be seen as an overhead, it can be viewed as a cost center, it lives in that part of the business. You can immediately help FM articulate, or FMs like Jules, organizations like Jules's, reframe the challenge, the opportunity from cost to value. That's kind of what you said.
Because it's what we do every day of our existence. It's a bit like the security and privacy concerns that always come up. Right. Again, that's a very common concerns. I've got a global role, and I can assure you there's many countries in the world, particularly in fact in Europe and Germany, where privacy is absolutely very much a constraint on what you can and can't do. We still successfully work in Germany. We still successfully work with FM companies, retail companies, etc., etc. And the way in which we do that is by sharing examples of where we've done it and getting very practical very quickly and saying, yes, we hear your hypothetical concerns, but here's an example of how we've actually got around it in practice and the benefit of that company of having done so.
And it's interesting because FM is most definitely an industry that likes to see the case studies where something's been successful before. So, I guess every organization sort of starts from point of, we're unique and our security issues are probably, you've never heard these ones before, but what you're saying is it's kind of a standard thing and you've worked out and you can show very practically how to deal with these things.
Yeah, absolutely, and that kind of moves us on to kind of, in some ways, the next thing, which is, one of the biggest challenges we've had as an industry is as we move our technology from physical servers in a location to this magical cloud thing, again, articulating the security, because instantly people go, oh, because it's not a server sitting in my basement, it must be less secure. What, your server sitting on your basement that hasn't been updated for 4 years, as opposed to billions of dollars that AWS and Microsoft spend every year creating secure data centers? Maybe not. And that also, the industry has changed fundamentally because of that approach. Because way we look at it now is, people often think of IT projects and they think of big cost up front, lots of consultants, failures, etc., etc. That's just not the way we work anymore. Today, it's all to do with incremental proofs of value. It's all to do with looking at specific business opportunities and challenges and saying, okay, so if we did this, how would that improve? All right. And you can now do that because of cloud compute. You don't have to have an enormous server rack set up somewhere, because you're actually now just paying for what you actually consume. So it's completely and radically changed the way in which you would develop a solution for Jules.
Okay, so I guess, agile is a very, very trendy word, but what you're essentially talking about is the infrastructure that sits behind the ability to be able to try things, build things quickly, test things. We're into the world of kind of like, minimum viable products and test apps and stuff like that, aren't we? So that we can just really try and spot value quickly rather than getting bogged down in monster projects.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe is it time to move to the next slide to actually just give a
I think so.
To give an idea of what a typical FM solution looks like in practice.
So this is talking to Jules's needs, but it's also based upon a genuine Microsoft case study, which we also feature in the report, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So this is a clip from an actual engagement that I worked on, and what we ended up creating. Now, this particular app actually is more focused on the user's requirements, but actually the data sets behind that enables you to book workspace, to be able to find your way around places, to be able to see where events are, to be able to actually find information, is exactly the same data set that Jules would use. It's just a different visualization of it.
So different lenses, essentially. No, there's different. So what I really sensed as we were sort of working through these different cases is quite often it's your core data serves different purposes in different directions, and that's the beauty of it when you really understand kind of the opportunity, I guess.
Yeah, and I'll just give you an example about data. So for example, at the moment, the ability to book a safe working environment within an office block is key. Okay, it's an absolutely essential to enable people to come back into their workplace. So you need information. You need access control information to be confident that the building's not overpopulated. You need to be able to book a space. You then integrate that with FM information that tells you when that place was last cleaned. You then provide wayfinding information, because if you're on a big building or a big campus, you create one-way walks, etc. So you can see, by bringing together all those little bits of data, you can create very simply a solution that says to your employees, says to your FM staff, you can be confident to come back to work. Okay, you can be confident about it. And the other thing is, in the background of this is again, because it's all cloud-based, the whole point of cloud services is that they are indeed evergreen, i.e. they themselves are updated incrementally. So there's none of these big kind of screeching halt on the IT and then another massive billion-dollar upgrade kind of thing, exaggerating. But it also means that you actually only pay for what you use. So as you do these little increments, as you build out these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, capabilities here, you build them out one at a time. And you're only actually paying for the consumption of the services that you're using at any one time. So the value can be demonstrated along with how much it's costing, and you can do that benefits analysis.
And I think the thing that we really got from the Jules case study as well was, this is something which will directly benefit her client contract. But absolutely. But by being able to get it off the ground in a more agile fashion, it is a packageable product. It could be reskinned, might not even need to be reskinned, but it's available to other clients of the service provider. So that classic starting point of, we haven't got the funds for research and development in FM, who's going to pay for this? Your partnership affords a new way to do it.
Absolutely. The ability to actually then implement this in your other buildings that you're responsible for, other parts of your business. And as you say, there's some companies I'm working with that are now actually selling this white labeled as a service, and they've opened up a whole new part of their business based on digital transformation.
Okay, fantastic. Right, big message there is it's not just for the big boys then. You need to get stuck in, you need to get cracking. Absolutely. Okay, right, let's keep going. I think it's time for some Q&As pretty soon. Peter, is it back to you now?
Indeed it is. So thank you both, Ian and David, just to go through that, and just to repeat, those case studies are actually within the guidance. Just moving forwards in terms of actually from an institute's perspective, what we're tackling next. Obviously, we're looking at not only our guidance, but the research to link in with our individual development. So our CPD training education, that's something we're exploring, particularly around some of the issues that's been raised today on and other episodes, I hasten to add, in terms of our Navigating Turbulent Times series when it comes to technology. I think, again, an argument there is looking beyond FM and workplace. Obviously, we've had Microsoft today discuss some of the issues they're faced with clients, and the case studies go into in depth in terms of some of those issues that have come up, but also learn from other industries as well, which has been called on many technology debates, but some sectors in particular have probably embraced technology, early adopters, I would say, of tech compared to FM, which again, the Embracing Tech report highlights further, which hopefully the part I was missing on today's episode, Ian ran through in terms of the results from that 2018 study. Again, one thing, as we know, without putting a label on anyone, technology has a role to play any age really, but attracting new talent in the profession. Everything's tech. If it can't be digitalized, what's the point of it, is one argument that was addressed from one of our keynote speakers at the IWFM conference this year. So tech has a massive role, and it's a huge game changer for everyone, for any sector, and that's certainly for the FM and workplace professionals we represent. And again, as this talked about our own technology partnerships, we continue our partnership with Microsoft, but we do have other partnerships happening at the moment around technology, and we look to pursue our technology program with the support of Microsoft moving into 21, tackling some of the issues that have been brought up in today's episode of today's webinar, but as I said, in other NTT programs webinars that we've had previously. So at this point, if I can ask our panel to come back in, I have been monitoring the questions, and you'd be pleased to know we have been getting questions in. So the minor hiccup from myself earlier on. I go down. So, okay, I've got a question. It's probably for the whole panel, and it's come from Annetta T. So thank you. Hopefully I pronounced your name right. Based on the findings from the report, are you able to identify any current and future training needs to improve digital literacy in FM? So echoing some of the points raised within the webinar around the need for training, education, CPD. So I don't know who wants to come in on that in terms of.
Well, so the two reports, I mean, you've got to see them as kind of like, the first report creates the need and it creates the urgency, and the second report talks about ways we can think about it, but it also sets the stage for more education and whatnot. James, you know, one thing that actually kind of is on the cutting room floor but didn't make the report was, we were playing with an idea of a model for a while, weren't we, around 3 different things to think about for in terms of digital and computer. So is that quite a nice way to talk about sort of educational opportunities, those 3 different sort of lenses? You remember what?
Yeah. So I mean, originally the way we were going to sort of frame it was this, you know, digital literacy, data literacy, and skills, and then computer or technology literacy and skills, and we kind of didn't use that model in the end. But yeah, I think particularly the digital and the data literacy are really important, because we do make the assumption that probably people know more than they actually know. And you know, it's interesting. I was having a conversation recently with one of our clients, and no, she was saying that we've made an assumption in the organisation that people know more about data than they actually do. Now, even basic terms that we probably take for granted, you know, what's the difference between quantitative and qualitative data and things like that. Very easy to assume that people know those things when they don't always do that. So yeah, I guess it depends where you see your you know, the areas where you need to develop most and where you think your weaknesses are, I guess. And you know, that's going to vary from individual to individual, isn't it? You know, if you know, we were on a conversation yesterday, we were chatting about things like, you know, the resources that Microsoft have on their website for learning about particular technologies or particular applications or particular pieces of software. But again, that will vary from person to person. David?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think I kind of have a view on which emerging technologies are most likely to affect the profession, for sure. And clearly, working with Peter and yourself, I think we can come up with a very sensible kind of pick list of things, because
is there anything,
you know,
sorry David, there, because
yeah,
it ties in with a number of questions that have come in around the use of the phrase emerging tech. A couple of people, listeners, viewers, have actually similar questions around, when we refer to emerging tech, what do you actually mean? And this digital transformation, hasn't it happened already?
Well, this is an interesting one, because, you know, David immediately took issue with us when he read the first report that we'd written. He was like, dudes, this isn't emerging tech. This is here. This is today. The fact that your industry is behind the curve doesn't mean it's not already here. So we've sort of phrased it in 2018 as emerging digital technology. But Anna, and I talked about in the introduction, when we didn't have the slides, I sort of painted a picture of these 3 broad groups beyond our FM stuff. automation, analytics, and artificial intelligence. So if we think about those and accept that they are digital, but they are, they're progressing, but they've already emerged, maybe David, you were sort of starting to lead on to the ones that you think are really coming FM's way.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, clearly one of the biggest ones is the whole Internet of Things, the ability to extract data from a building of what's going on. I mean, frankly, the implementation of IoT within the FM industry is frankly pitiful compared to even smart buildings themselves. When I look at buildings, it's very rare that the FM provision has any what I would call IoT sensors. The best thing they have is little smiley faces in the toilets, kind of thing, that you press. So there is massive opportunity around the use of IoT sensors within the FM industry. There's massive opportunity to take the data from the building itself, from the building management systems, and actually integrate that into the business and systems of the FM. And that's very rare. I mean, I don't see that much at all. So emerging technologies, IoT, the Internet of Things, for me is like, yeah, of course we do that. Frankly, I think that's an area to focus on. Then there's the technology around how you actually get that data out of the building and into the cloud. And then there's a technology in the cloud that actually then takes that data and does something useful with it. In the first instance, it enables you to visualize it. That's kind of like the crawl level. The walk level is when you then take that data and start analyzing it and predicting things. Yeah. And then the run level is where you start then applying artificial intelligence, and it actually enables you to self-automate things. So, I mean, if you think about that as my arc and the conversations I have with all sorts of industries, if I had to plot FM on that arc, you'd be very much down here. And there's lots of industries that I think are similar to you that are way up the line that I think FM would benefit from seeing and understanding and using your expertise and knowledge to think how it might apply to your industry.
No, that's great. Yeah, I think it's a good segue. Go ahead, Ian. Sorry.
I was just, I'm in the spirit of a true sort of Q&A and panel debate, David, that's really interesting because, so from an external set of eyes upon us, upon FM, if you like, and workplace, you said there, other industries that you see as comparable. Who could you point to for like exemplars of that they've learned to at least walk rather than crawl that FM can learn from?
Keeping within real estate, I would say the construction industry.
Okay.
Which is historically, let's look at the industry, driven down to minute margins. Yeah. Subcontracted, just from a commercial structure perspective. Look at the workforce, look at the staff, look at the skills that the people have. There's quite a lot of relatively unskilled staff, and the pay differential between them and the people that run is enormous. Yeah. But look at the way that the construction industry is using the Internet of Things to actually improve around safety is a massive issue. All right, for them. So cameras identify things that are out of place are very, very common now. Cameras identify drums that should be like that and are like that, straight away indicate that. Tracking of important assets. I'm no construction person, but there's a big cutty thing that they need, big expensive cutty thing, and they've only got 2 of them on the entire site. Do you know how much time they spend trying to find the big cutty things? And yet with the Internet of Things, by having a tag, an asset tag on it, really simple ideas, people know where it is. And so just, there's an example. There are others.
David, one of the big themes coming out from the questions, and they're flooding through. This is always the beauty of these things. You've got 2 or 3, 4 questions coming now. I'm struggling to keep up with them. But one of the big barriers, I guess, and it's mentioned earlier about data, digital ethics and data security, is around how do we feel the new data reporting and internet items will be affected and governed by GDPR? So those 4 letters that send shiver down people's spines. What is the big barrier around security? Do we dispel the myth from the perspective? Because I think sometimes that's used, is it safe to say, as a form of excuse of not progressing with some tech? Could I be so bold?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, you know, I've been in the industry for you know, I've been with Microsoft for 15 years, and you know, the concerns about security and privacy are always at the forefront of people's reasons why not to do anything. But if you think about it now, and think about, for example, the armed forces now use Office 365. They use a cloud service for their email system. I spent 22 years in the Royal Air Force before joining Microsoft, and the thought of using a public cloud service is unbelievable. And yet those of us who are in the industry and Microsoft are going again back to this idea. So you think your data center that you run down the road with, you know, still running on NT and running on, you know, unpatched software with, you know, what you think that compares with AWS's or Microsoft's or Google's multi-billion-dollar installations? You know, we're the second most hacked organization in the world, Microsoft is. You know, so we can actually show and demonstrate compliance with GDPR. You know, it's just, to me, it's kind of like it's what's the expression about odds? What is it? Chips to get into the game?
Table stakes. I think.
Yeah, there you go. Table stakes. You know, if you're not GDPR compliant, you can't do anything. So to me, that's of course we're there. But specific industry concerns can then be addressed on an issue by issue basis by either using examples of companies or organizations with your own industry that are actually happily working like this, or by bringing our expertise of other industries into play and saying, well, okay, tell me what the differences are, and then we can practically work through and give you the confidence. And this is back to this idea about, you know, giving people the confidence around understanding what can be done so that the industry owns their future and it's not being done to them by others.
Yeah, it's definitely something. A couple of questions that have come in around security in particular, so I thought I'd group that under that question. Now, I'm aware of time, and that half of that was my fault for having a power cut. These things happen on a live webinar. Around if I'm going to get all the panelists involved. So James, I'll start with you. It's sort of the wrap-up question. So we'll let listeners, viewers know that the questions will be sent on to our panelists that we couldn't go through today. But I guess it's a bit of a holding the mirror up against the Institute IWFM as well. But a question's come in, a couple of questions linked to this theme around what, in your view, are the key messages to emphasise in promoting the digitalisation of FM to the rest of the business organisation. One would argue that's what we're trying to do with our research and guidance. But I guess what in your view, what are the key messages to really get this promoted across businesses and organisations? Because of course today a lot of our viewers will be the FM workplace professionals that we refer to within the report and the guidance.
Yeah, I mean, I'd see this as one part of FM and workplace professionals being able to have those more informed conversations with their clients and their businesses that they support. You know, digital is just one element of that. It's an important one. And, you know, one of the points we're making in the report is it ultimately comes down to individuals, isn't it? You know, that question about what could I do to develop myself or develop my knowledge in this area. It's a very individual thing, and particularly in an industry. It's interesting that David talked about construction. One of the, you know, similarities between FM and construction is there's a long tail of small businesses, isn't there? You know, there are some big players, but there's also, and it's easier for them to sort of maybe take a lead on technology, or that maybe that's the perception, but actually there's a lot of SMEs, aren't there? A lot of smaller businesses, and you know, this partnership approach actually is a key enabler for those smaller organisations to maybe move forward in this area.
No, thank you, James. And Ian?
Yeah, I mean, I go back to the 2018 report and the finding, which is here is by any sort of analyses. We looked at McKinsey analyses of multiple industries. We looked at the RICS analysis of the surveying industry before we wrote our report. And to a degree, we sort of emulated some of the thinking, some of the analysis that the RICS folks did when they were writing their report around, let's look at our industry and let's consider how ripe it is for disruption, for automation, for all of those words. This is a genuine threat to a complacent industry that doesn't have the skills, by its own admission, that it needs to do something about for the future. And what we've tried to do in 2020 with this report is produce a bit of a roadmap, essentially. You know, the bit that James talked about, some of the new skills to develop around design thinking, some of the basic skills of which courses already exist with IWFM as part of the workplace leadership program, for example, around understanding data and knowing how to think about data and frame the right questions. They get you in the direction of doing of trying and starting to do things differently. But there's no two ways about it. You want to change anything, you've got to put the effort in, you've got to do the work. You've got to try something, you've got to learn to do something different. And the whole point of these three scenarios, these three personas, is they're all examples of different ways, as David says, to use more agile ways, whether they are, you know, we haven't talked about Joe at all, but the Joe persona is essentially using a self-serve tool that Microsoft has to be able to build your own apps without, you know, the partnership approach there is slightly different, but there are ways that you can work in, you know, with the industry in all sorts of different ways to really set yourself up for success. But there's only one message, which is do the work or be disrupted. And it's deliberately controversial, but it's as simple as that.
And in some ways, Ian, the poll results today mirrored that, because they exactly matched from 2018. So
That's
obviously,
the one.
Skill seems to be a golden thread on a lot of the questions coming through, and obviously what the guidance is hoping to achieve as well. So skills was something that's been brought up numerous times.
It's really easy to say, right? But Nokia, Motorola, they had the market share. They knew how to do mobile phones, and then the iPhone came along.
So David, nice segue from the Microsoft perspective of how we raise this profile of this digital transformation, which you could argue in some cases, some sectors would argue that it's already there. What would your view be on how individuals promote this amongst the FM workplace professional world?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of go back, it might sound a bit cheesy, but I go back to kind of Microsoft's core mission, which is about empowering people and organizations to achieve more. And I look at the FM industry, and I kind of look at the people that work in the FM industry, and I kind of think, you know, why wouldn't you want to understand more around digital technology and where it's going? You know, because it's actually quite interesting stuff. You know, it's fascinating stuff. Most of us have, not me personally, but a lot of people actually use better tech in their private life than they do in their business life. And I mean, that is nuts, isn't it? It's just absolutely crazy. So people are actually more tech savvy than they realize sometimes. But as a professional, that professional development and understanding, you know, a better understanding of digital tech, I think also is the lifeblood of the profession for me. Because how are you going to attract, you know, talent, younger people, new people into your industry? And I'm not saying tech's the only way, but I'd suggest that it might be a very interesting way to start emphasizing that I'm a tech FM, or I'm an FM tech, or whatever we want to call it. You know, that actually, and certainly Ian and James, you know, in your work in universities and the people you work with, your students, you know, we've had this conversation. You know, if we could kind of put a tech wrapper around the role and kind of make it look more interesting from that perspective, it's got to be good for the industry, hasn't it? It's got to be good to attract different types of people into the industry. And at the end of the day, any industry is only as good as the people that are in the industry.
I feel this actually builds to probably another episode needed as part of our series, really, because the debate doesn't stop here. But I just want to say a massive thank you to the viewers, listeners that have sent questions in. And as I said, I will promise to get this across to the panelists. At this point, I want to say a massive thank you, as I see you on my screens, to James, Ian and David, as authors of that guidance that will be launched this week. A massive thank you. I know it's been a lot of hard work. The truth comes out in terms of the publication, but I think it's actually building a roadmap, building on the 2018 study around around guidance, and really, as I say, the Institute to provide that education around some of the issues that were addressed and raised today. And as I say, the debate doesn't stop here, just as technology doesn't stop either. So once again, James, Ian, David, a massive thank you from me and IWFM for your support on the webinar, as well as the creation of the guidance. So audience, I've just got a couple more questions, slides to go through, if that's okay. This will be the home of where the new guidance will be housed. It will be on our Insights Hub, where you will see research reports, good practice guides, guidance notes and content hubs. Some of that will tackle the technology theme, so there is guidance on IoT and other things on there, so please look out for that. It's accessible to members and non-members, majority of the guidance, but please have a look there, for that's where the new guidance that's been mentioned and discussed on today's webinar will be housed, so please look out for it on there. As all on our series and part of Navigating Turbulent Times, we do have a COVID-19 pages to support our members and non-members. Once again, that is a free access for all. This is regularly updated, as you can imagine, with recent events. So actually the return to work section's been updated as we speak. So from that point of view, please look out for that resource on our website. Again, as always, we appreciate your feedback. Any feedback's good. That's in terms of case studies. Any questions you've got, please email to that email address there. Also, just to let you know, we do have a survey after to be sent to you to respond not only to this webinar in terms of your views, but also future content for our series. We have listened, we have acted in terms of developing our episodes based on that feedback. So please fill in a short questionnaire you should receive shortly after this webinar has ended. And once again, lastly, viewers, listeners, just a massive thank you for you joining today's live webinar. As you can see, the joys of doing anything live, things can happen. But hopefully today, giving you enough flavour from the work that was produced back in 2018, a very comprehensive research report that Ian kindly went through today. James discussed the point around digital literacy and the skills debate, which was a number of your questions coming through linked to that. And obviously David from Microsoft, who actually kindly went through some of the case studies and experiences that he's faced with clients and the FM industry. And as I say, as an institute, we're there to educate and learn and guide our members and non-members around this subject. And as I say, we've got an exciting technology program building on some of the points I raised earlier around, okay, what are we doing next? And that's something that as an institute, technology is one of our key pillars of work. So this webinar has been recorded and will be available shortly on our website. Take care, everyone, and next week's episode will be on social value, so we reach episode 30, so the details of that will be out shortly, end of this week, I understand. So thank you again for your time and patience, and see you soon. Thanks again.